21 hours later. 20 minutes following the conclusion of Professor Articor's class. The Transgration Academy for the Magical Arts, en route to the Apprentice's Tower. Local time, 17:20 hours. Emma. Eleanor did, in fact, find last night's impasse to be quite unacceptable, which was why much of the previous night was spent concocting a plan, one which was devised primarily to alleviate Eleanor's growing concerns over Maltori's book. Ultimately, we agreed that no matter what, we would go to Lariel's office today, regardless of her absence. So, following a surprisingly tame lecture, courtesy of Professor Articord, on topics that seemed to once again reinforce the Nexus's perpetually expanding, forever Discworld, we now found ourselves barreling headfirst into the unknown. But at least we weren't alone.
What? Why didn't you start off with that? Of course I'd be happy to entertain this discourse, my lord.
Though whether or not that was a boon or a burden was most definitely up for debate. But I knew one thing was for certain. The fact he was able to make it work was definitely the most magical thing I'd seen him do so far. Because through some odd combination of wishy-washy words, with enough empty and vapid grand sweeping statements, he was able to actually convince the overly dramatic apprentice Ral Altaria del Naya Say and his Sonzia II, henceforth shortened to the Bridge Apprentice, to take us to Lariel's office. Or at least, as close to Lariel's office as was possible, as our destination technically wasn't her office, but instead his own.
If I may, while this is not my prerogative nor duty, my own exploits behooves me to ask. Why is it that you have kept your drake-jockeying exploits hidden for so long, my lord?
The apprentice practically bellowed out, eliciting the attention of literally everyone currently sharing our hallway.
Oh, shush now, my dear fellow. I am nothing if not a modest man. I mean, why else would I have even entertained the thought of leading this sorry troop I call my peers if it weren't so?
The deluxe kobold jeered, garnering a vapidly friendly snooty laugh from the likes of the apprentice.
A drake rider and a gentleman. It would be an honor to discuss your aerial exploits, my lord,
the man replied boisterously.
I am, after all, something of a sky jockey myself.
He chaffed through an uncomfortable series of haughty, nasally laughs.
So, if you would be so willing, perhaps we may trace stories of this gentlemanly pastime. Of course. Where would my manners be if not with those who have earned their place amongst the skies?
Eleanor continued the mind-numbing flattery until he didn't.
Though, of course, I imagine we can disregard pretenses, if you would be so earnest. Pretenses, my lord?
Let us not be beside ourselves, apprentice. We both understand the ultimate conclusion of this discourse, no? Eleanor continued, his social facade contorting to a more coy one.
Why else would the second apprentice, lead of the students' flying organization, be so forthcoming with this discussion? If not to offer me a place amidst their ranks.
Eleanor went for the jugular there, causing the apprentice to stiffen up, if only for a moment.
Am I that much of an open book, my lord?
He grinned cheekily.
Perhaps I am merely an expert at deciphering the abstract and profound.
Eleanor spoke in a way I've rarely seen him do, flattering the man and inflating his already eccentric ego. As we finally crossed the threshold and into the apprentice's tower, in the midst of their collective laughter, Eleanor finally glanced sharply in my direction, as if to remind me of our ad hoc plan. The previous night.
Remember, Earthrealmer, our plan is not to court this buffoon, but instead to play the spy master. Now, it is commonly known that the apprentices live, breathe, and work in their own exclusive tower. Thus, all we require is a passing stroll through their offices, and a glancing mention of Lariel's, at which point I would humbly demand that you utilize 2 of your mannerless creatures, one to confirm the whereabouts of the Green Book, and the second to act as our permanent sentry within her office. While I believe stealing the book to be a more straightforward solution, I will acquiesce to your demands. Ensuring the book's whereabouts will be sufficient. Moreover, so long as a second mannerless insect remains to notify us of Lariel's return, I shall be satisfied to simply request the book from her when she returns.
Just to be clear, Eleanor, I'm only doing this because it's pertinent to your quest. I'm not going to go around bugging the whole school. The more assets I deploy, the more I run the risk of people finding out about these drones. If that happens, we can say goodbye to the single most useful asset I have. Evie? Yes, Cadet Booker. You got those drones ready? Affirmative. Infil Drone 01A. Status. Ready to deploy. Infil Drone 02A. Status. Ready to deploy. Good. Just be ready to deploy them the moment we find our opening. Acknowledged.
Cadet Emma Booker!
The bridge apprentice quickly turned in my direction.
I can only imagine the sorts of awe-stricken faces to be garnered once the taming of sky beasts and the introduction of aerial vehicles finally reaches your realm.
I responded with a tired nod, diffusing the man's intentions as he went back to the mindless back and forth with Eleanor. Our walk through the apprentice's tower was surprisingly normal, all things considered. As unlike the faculty tower, there seemed to be markedly reduced instances of geometry-defined anomalies. If anything, it reminded me of Dragon's Heart Tower, if only a little bit more dressed up. With white and black checkerboard marble floors adorning the lobby, and chandeliers appointing practically every hallway intersection that led way to the magical elevators. Indeed, there seemed to only be one set of stairs in this entire tower. Though not grand, what it lacked in size, it more than made up for in verticality, as this spiral staircase quite literally went all the way up, about 30 or so stories. We passed by hundreds of elven portraits on our way up, through the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and then finally the 20th floor. At which point, Eleanor was practically gasping for breath. The Venerian, surprisingly, made it a point not to use me as his trusty steed this time around.
Apologies, my lord. I'd have assumed... Is this the apprentice's office floor?
Eleanor managed out, in between unsteady breaths, leaning against one of the ornate pillars and pointing at what was effectively a hallway with door upon unmarked door. This posed a problem, as identifying Lariel's office was practically impossible.
Indeed it is. Now my office is just this way, the man continued, walking down the corridor.
At which point did Eleanor finally strike, in between bouts of vapid conversation.
Does the Academy insist on keeping your doors so bland?
So completely unadorned? This prompted the man to stop as he cocked his head in Eleanor's direction.
Without any form of personal embellishments, as is the case with any noble occupying any of His Eternal Majesty's ministries. That is Academy regulation, my lord. For shame, Eleanor tutted. 'Tis but a blank canvas. Just think, if given the opportunity, what brilliant gilded works would you adorn your door with, apprentice?
This one question opened up the floodgates of torrential yapping, as seconds bled into minutes, prompting me to turn to the Evie. It takes a yapper to know a yapper, but I assume I don't go that far when I really get into it, right? Error. Query is unquantifiable. I was about to question exactly what the Evie meant by that, if it wasn't for Eleanor's gambit quickly panning out.
Now, what would you say Apprentice Arlan Ostoy would prefer? Oh, that dark and broody sycophant? Why, I'd assume his door would be completely gone, buried, entirely overrun, hidden, entombed, and intoned beneath the crests and sigils of those victims of his insincere flattery. I can understand perhaps why personification would be quite troublesome then, Eleanor chuckled. But even so, I doubt it would be an issue if his office weren't adjacent to your own, no? Ha! While that may be so, there are others whose aesthetic differences would be entirely unacceptable.
The conversation snowballed on from there. So that's how he's going to subtly draw out intel from him, feigning interest for each and every apprentice, and by extension, their hypothetical door makeovers. I guess loose lips really do sink ships. My mind was practically sludge by the end of it, at which point he finally started talking about Lariel's door. Jackpot. But I still couldn't deploy the drones, though. I needed just the right window of opportunity.
Here, allow me,
the apprentice beamed, opening the door to his office, while utterly enamored by Eleanor's conversation. He's distracted. Deploy. Infildrone 01A, deployed. Infildrone 02A, deployed. Seconds was all that was needed. A second to undock, a second to take off, and another second to book it towards Lariel's office. Objective 1 complete. Commencing primary surveys. The first phase of the mission was a success.
Oh, Cadet Emma Booker, would you care to join us for a spot of tea?
The apprentice hollered, his voice booming from within his room. But now comes the real challenge, actually following through with our asinine pretenses. 2 hours later.
And thus I proclaimed, you shall not pass.
We both stared at the apprentice blankly. Just to clarify, this was during your stint as the bridge guard to the library, right?
Oh, no, by His Majesty's word, no. This was during my first instance as an exam proctor.
We both breathed out a sigh of exhaustion, our eyes collectively turning to the clock behind the man. This prompted him to quickly follow suit, his eyes widening in horror.
By His Majesty, has it been that long?
The apprentice stood up, his head now glancing back and forth between the door and his window, one that overlooked the grand dining hall and the dinner which we were now all late for.
Let us make haste,
he yelled, quickly grabbing his keys and then promptly shunting us out the door. From there, it was every man for himself. As the apprentice booked it by leaping and jumping straight through the central chasm in the middle of the spiral staircase. This left just Eleanor and I to blink at each other blankly. Well, that was Infildrone 1A, mission parameters, accomplished, RTB. I stopped in my tracks, my eyes quickly focusing on the targeting reticule, highlighting the return of Infildrone 1A. Eleanor, with visible disgust upon noticing the drone's docking procedures, spoke urgently.
Well, is it?
Data upload complete. Priority target located. Report available. Yeah, it's there all right, I nodded, my eyes quickly scrolling through the brief one-page report, complete with embedded video. Behind some fancy glowing magical barriers, but it's there.
By His Eternal Majesty's light.
The Venerian breathed a sigh of relief. You're welcome, I chided. Well, with that over with, the second infildrone will report Lariel's arrival as soon as it detects it. Eleanor nodded, his features locked between relief and a still latent nervousness. It'll be fine, Eleanor. Trust me. Now let's get some well-deserved downtime, shall we? With a surprisingly polite nod, we were off, taking the long way down the spiral staircase, though about halfway I began fantasizing about simply jumping straight through the middle hole with Eleanor in tow. The suit is rated for it, or at least close to it, I thought to myself, just as our silent little jaunt came to an inexplicable halt.
Students, in the exaltorium?
A hardened female voice broke me out of my reverie. A voice brimming with both urgency and authority, carrying with it a cadence that I hadn't yet heard on this side of the portal. A cadence that immediately brought back memories of Auntie Rand's drill instructor tone, and one that I'd gotten used to following the instructions of for the past year of training. I instinctively stopped, my muscles tensing reflexively as I turned to face the source of this voice. One that the EV had yet to assign a name or a face to. In front of us, or rather a flight of stairs below us on the next floor down, was an armoured elf. Though unlike Sorosar's full-form plate armour, leaving everything to the imagination, this elf's uniform was something else entirely. A design that screamed officer material. With a sloped and elegant copper-gold chestplate that ended just above her lower abdomen, 2 glowing pauldrons with Igelites that tethered into some hidden side pocket, a half-helmet nestled in the crook of her arm, and a flowy Age of Sail captain's jacket set over the armour, both her aesthetic and presence were set in stark contrast to everything I've seen at the Academy so far. And it wasn't just her outfit that was doing it for me either. If anything, it was her gaze. Her piercing, no-nonsense expression that lacked the signature look of haughty superiority found on other nobles, instead replacing it with a relaxed look of assured authority. It was something that only the Dean, and Mal Tory to a certain extent, had been able to embody. Except this time, it was being done effortlessly. "Yes, ma'am," I replied instantly, leaving barely any time for dead air to form.
They allow first years to roam freely now, do they?
"No, ma'am. We were granted permission by one apprentice Rala Ataria del Naya."
"Save your breath, girl,"
the armoured elf interjected, much to my surprise. A quick glance to Eleanor's pale blue face confirmed that this brevity was definitely out of the ordinary.
"Now tell me, I don't imagine you can fly now, can you?"
That question caught both of us by surprise. As Eleanor attempted to address it, opening his mouth only to be shot down.
"Not you, Venerian."
The elf quite literally snapped her head in Eleanor's direction, the only part of her to even move with the rest of her remaining as still as a statue.
"I was addressing the candidate."
Her head quickly snapped back in my direction, those dark purple eyes piercing sharply through my lenses. "Not through conventional means, ma'am," I answered bluntly.
"Let me be clear. Can you or can you not ride a winged mount?"
"No, ma'am. Not anything Nexian or otherwise, at least."
"And yet you were present at what was ostensibly a recruitment campaign for the Academy's flying club," she reasoned,
deducing everything in what felt like a heartbeat. "Yes, ma'am, I was present, though it is worth noting,
I require no further explanation."
She cut me off once more, her features betraying neither dissatisfaction nor malicious intent.
"I appreciate your honesty, candidate. Not many would be so forthright, so willing to admit to what would otherwise be a cause for suspicion to oneself."
The elf cleared her throat, her features intentionally softening. "Such honesty is refreshing." A few seconds' pause suddenly punctuated those words. Though barely a drop in the bucket in most conversations, the rapid pace of this one made the silence feel unbearably long by comparison. This pause was uncharacteristically broken by a soft snicker and a genuine smile across a face second only to the armour for its stoicism.
"I won't take much more of your time," It is not my place, nor do I care to enforce the Academy's rules." The elf's words, just as surprisingly, started softening by the tail end of things. Not so much switching between authoritative and lenient, but more so skirting the gradient of both. "I take it your time has been well spent thus far, candidate." "Yes, ma'am." "Your experiences, satisfactory?" "In all honesty, given I have nothing to compare this experience to, I'd have to get back to you on that one, ma'am." That response elicited a slight change in the elf's features, namely the subtle growth of a friendly smirk. "A diplomat's response. Admittedly terse, but stately all the same," she acknowledged with a genuine smile. "Very well. If there is anything I can do to improve your experience, please, as they say in the common vernacular, don't be a stranger." "I'll certainly keep that in mind. Thank you." I dipped my head slightly in response. "Both of you best be off now. I wish you both a pleasant dinner. If we ever cross paths again, I do wish to extend my offer in providing you your first wing mount experience, candidate, seeing as you have yet to have the pleasure of doing so," she offered, as that tone of authority gave way to genuine warmth, if only for a brief moment. "Carry on as you were, candidate. Venerian?" 1,001 questions flooded my mind now, all of which were poised straight at this mysterious armored elf, though I knew this wasn't the place for it. We were just offered an out, and I was sure as hell going to take it. Ilalor most definitely agreed with this, as he began pacing much faster than he did earlier. However, just as we passed by the mystery elf stoic figure, did she suddenly decide to throw a curveball our way. "And students," she uttered politely, yet refused to turn in our direction. "Yes, ma'am? I don't suppose either of you have seen Apprentice Lariel around, have you?" I froze, my whole body tensing inside of the armor. Ilalor, thankfully, remained cool all throughout, his poker face really coming in handy now more than ever. "No, ma'am." "I see. Very well then, as you were." We began pacing out of there following that, and despite not overtly showing any signs of malicious intent, I couldn't help but to keep my eyes plastered on my rearview camera, as it showed the armored elf's static and stoic form just standing there, remaining completely still within eyeshot until we were finally out of a direct line of sight. Several hours later. Dragon's Heart Tower, Level 23, Residence 30, Living Room, Local Time 2100 hours. Emma. "What the hell was that?" I managed out under an unsteady breath, having just replayed the entire sequence of events to an incredibly wary Thalmin and an equally apprehensive Thacia.
"She's a Goldthorn, that's what,"
Eleanor hissed out for a sooty breath. Goldthorn. No known translations found within the working language database. I'm sorry, that's not really translating well.
"A member of the Inner Guard, specifically those granted investigative authority, primarily in policing and intelligence duties. Goldthorns is simply a term for those performing investigations open to the public light. That's how she deduced, quite easily, the business we had in the Exaltorium. No doubt she saw that buffoon jumping off the 20th floor."
Eleanor trailed off before reorienting himself with a cough.
"In any case, Goldthorns tend to be problematic, but harmless if you avoid obstructing their investigation. They are, in their own strange way, honor-bound to the rule of law and noble justices."
"This is in stark contrast to the Blackthorns, who work exclusively in the dark, performing ancestors only knows what in the shadows of the Nexus and beyond," Thalmin growled out, his eyes locked onto the armored elf's friendly smile. "New esoteric colloquialisms added to the working language database. Right, that makes sense," I nodded. "A thorn in one's backside is probably where this originates from, right?" A few blinks were exchanged between both Thalmin and Eleanor, each narrowing their eyes at my statement.
Roughly, yes, they spoke unanimously. Though when you phrase it so blatantly, you lose the transformative principle which elevates the word from common to high Nexian, Eleanor explained, eliciting an affirmative beep from the EV's active learning algorithms. However, no sooner was that beep heard did another assault my senses. This one actually offering something vital to the conversation. Alert! Current topic of discussion matches recorded footage from Maltori's office. Accurate to minimal extrapolative parameters. My eyes grew wide at the rapid analysis report, RAR, as a few seconds was all that was necessary to connect the dots. Thank you, Evie, I acknowledged inwardly, before turning to everyone present. Guys, I announced, garnering everyone's attention, I think we may know who she is and what she's doing here. With a quick flick of my tablet, I began replaying the info drone's footage from Lariel's investigation of Maltori's office, honing in on Sorosar's questions as to the apprentice's involvement with the inner guard.
Though forgive me if I'm overstepping my bounds here, but I do assume that the seal on your notebook belongs to the inner guard. Dare I say it, it reminds me of a suborder within the guard, the beholders of his eternal majesty, to be precise.
Eleanor plopped back against the couch at this reminder, his hands cradled in a triangle around his snout. So this must be the investigator the Dean mentioned too, I acknowledged. A member of the inner guard, the beholders of his eternal majesty, Eleanor interjected. That narrows it down somewhat, but not precisely. However, this is admittedly one of the tamer suborders within the inner guard, which explains why she seemed rather hospitable. I still wouldn't dare entertain anything she says or offers, Cadet Emma Booker, Eleanor warned gravely. If anything, her earlier actions could be explained away as a dragon toying with its food.
But in any case, Thalmin sighed out loudly, the Dean says he's covering Lord Lartia's death, is he not?
Yeah, I nodded.
And, if anything, she seems much more focused on Lariel, he continued.
Yeah, maybe there's some game going on behind the scenes. Maybe she's expanded the investigation's scope beyond Lord Lartia's death to Maltori's responsibility with the library, or maybe it's a little bit of everything. Let's just keep on our toes for the time being. We all nodded collectively at that, breathing a sigh of relief, with everyone reaching for this evening's tray of delectable snacks. But just as everyone was about to settle in, homework in one hand, tea in another, a series of knocks threw us back into the deep end.
Knock! Knock! Knock!
Everyone held their breaths as both Thalmin and I stood up first. Though it was Thalmin who ultimately decided to take the plunge, as he marched forward, opening the door to reveal...
Oi! I thought I was done with you lot! Now you're expecting packages at the crack of moonlight?
The bridge apprentice drawled out, handing Thalmin a package.
And here I thought, oh, that should be it for all you worthless busybodies, tailored clothes and bespoke pens? I guess they missed a package now, didn't they? He chastised. You ought to pick the more reputable establishments in town, ones that actually finish their orders on time.
We all stared at the man in varying levels of confusion, though he did offer Eleanor a little nod through the doorway.
We slam!
Thalmin barely had any time to counter him before he was rebuked by a door slam.
Emma?
Yes, Thalmin?
What exactly did you order from town? I assumed your knickknacks were already all delivered.
They were, I countered. Let me see what that... I walked up, grabbing the package, before realizing just what this was before even opening it. Oh, I muttered, furiously tearing the festive wrapper apart to reveal a boring white box. Within it, however, was a dozen or so vials of ink. probably to add weight to it so it wasn't too suspicious. And a simple note. One written in some sort of cipher that Thacia promptly decoded. "The Guildmaster requests your presence tomorrow, Emma," she uttered softly. "Late afternoon, early evening preferably." "So they're back that early, huh?"
"Not necessarily," Thalmin corrected. "It is customary for guild leaders to provide ample warning before the return of an adventuring party, out of courtesy for the issuer of a quest. Given the professionalism of Sims troubleshooters, I assume they more than likely sent a messenger bird out in advance."
"Right," I nodded. "All right then."
I took a breath, steadying myself for the two major paths in front of us.
I think we can put a tentative pause on Eleanor's library quest for now. With the book firmly in Lariel's office and the drone there as an early warning measure, I think we should be fine. So with that quest on hold until Lariel's arrival, let's focus on catching ourselves an amethyst dragon.
20 hours later. The Grand Concourse of Learning. The Hall of Light. Manifold Perception and Light Magic Theory class. Incumbent Lecturer, Professor Maltori, not available. Apprentice Lariel, not available. Professor Sorazar, present. Local time, 1700 hours. Emma. Lariel was once again nowhere to be found, which meant that the class was, by rules of succession, temporarily under Sorazar's reign. All of this was to say, this was actually a fun class for once. Combining that with the whole class sovereign posturing between the big two, and today's class was less of a boring lecture and more an entirely demonstrative class, consisting primarily of magical dueling, with lectures seamlessly embedded during, between, or at the tail end of each fight. Project Wand Step for Mankind would have very much been useful in the class, no doubt. But inexplicable complications forced its temporary hold, until the Eevee could fine-tune issues found in both its software and hardware.
Ho ho ho! I have yet to see such heated theatrics between two sovereign candidates to be!
Sorazar beamed out boisterously, his laughter echoing within the armor, generating this tinny voice that caused some students to flinch in annoyance.
Young lords, I urge you to pace yourselves. While I am more than happy to provide a stage to upstage one another, I would not dare ask you to risk life and limb for a simple lecture. At least not until the Academy changes their minds on such matters.
The man spoke coyly.
Ah, I still remember the days when... Toot toot toot! Ah, well, that's that then. Please remember to do your homework.
All eyes were on the empty blackboard, prompting the man to clarify himself.
Your homework, of course, is to improve the skills you've observed today. For next time, there will be more practicals, he beamed.
Sighs were exchanged all throughout the hall as everyone started filing out. However, contrary to the flow of students, the gang and I remained behind. Only after the students and the band had left did we approach Sorazar. The man cocking his head clearly in curiosity at our unprompted conversation. "Professor?"
"Yes, Cadet Emma Booker?"
"There are only a handful of ways to leave the Academy for town during the weekdays, though it is not uncommon for students to fabricate their own reasons to enjoy the freedom of town life as opposed to the bland sameness of the evening dinner." I recall Thacia's words last night as I took a breath, hoping this little gambit would work. "I was wondering if you could give me a night pass into town. I need some modifications done to my school uniform." I smiled brightly. The professor's visor slowly lowered itself at that question, mimicking what I could only imagine was a narrowing of one's eyes out of suspicion.
"Is that so? And what exactly is wrong with your uniform, Cadet?" he shot back coyly.
"Well, I'm thinking I need to loosen the size of the cloak a bit. They sorta get in the way of my movement," I managed out, with a sly yet nervous smile beneath the helmet.
Oh, is that so? Why, we most certainly can't have that holding back our students.
The man's visor suddenly flipped up, the plate of steel snapping up so fast that it reached the end of its hinge with a solid clank, forcing it to rebound back down into a closed position.
Well, as acting professor, this is something I can easily do.
He chuckled boisterously, that tinny voice causing Eleanor to squint. You're really the MVP here, Sorosar, I thought to myself with a satisfied smile, watching as the man began drafting up a small letter.
Just make sure to return before the portals close.
He dipped his tone for just a moment, making sure to hammer home that one non-negotiable clause. Will do, Professor. Thank you. I bowed deeply, the man reciprocating as we eventually bid our goodbyes for the time being.
And do stop by the workshop sometime, Cadet Mabuka,
he beamed, flailing his arms around from the bottom of the lecture hall.
I have much to discuss.
Nexus. The Crown Herald Town of Elisir. Ambassadorial District. The Adventurers Guildhall of Elisir. Local time 1754 hours. Sim the Honeydew. Thump, thump, thump. Slam! We entered through those double doors with ragged breaths and mud-stained boots. A loud thump soon followed, as gear and supplies were dropped unceremoniously onto the guild's hardwood floors. Yet in spite of our loud and flippant arrival, not a single soul present seemed to be the least bit bothered. What would have otherwise upended the chatter of the rowdiest of bars was just another weekday around here. If anything, the world within the Guildhall seemed to accommodate this sort of unprompted arrival. As adventurers in training quickly arrived to collect, organize, and sort our gear into neat little trolleys, the sort of service one would only expect to find in one of those upscale inns. More than that, we were greeted with the soft and polite smile of one of the guild's most prominent public-facing figures. A woman, only known as the receptionist. I see you four have returned, the elf noted, with her perpetually cordial cadence, flicking open her gold-tethered pocket watch in the process. Earlier than expected, and right on time for your appointment. Wouldn't have sent a bird if we weren't going to make the call, I replied cockily. So, are our quest givers here yet? No, but I doubt you'll be able to make yourselves presentable within a timely fashion. I suggest you make haste for the Guildmaster's office, as it shouldn't take long now before... Slam! They arrive. We turned towards the door, some of us caked in mud, others in soot and ash, to find four neatly dressed, prim and proper nobles, two of which seemed to have their hands full with all manner of overpriced snacks, though only one, the Venerian, seemed adamant on making sure everyone knew his presence, and that his time was not worthy of delaying his dinner over, munching down on said treats with a condescending glare. Ha! Well, isn't this a coincidence? The Blue Knight spoke first, taking the reins of the conversation. We have much to discuss. Aye, that we do, I acknowledged wearily.